What's going on, guys? Welcome to the pilot episode of Renaissance Fishing. I wanted to give you guys a brief synopsis today on what this channel is going to be about and who exactly I am. So my name is Cody Jackson. I'm a marine biologist as well as an avid surf and offshore fisherman. I also fish the jetties and the piers down here. Mainly when I go to the surf and the jetties, I'm going to be targeting things like sharks, redfish, jack crevalle, stingrays, and species of that nature. And then whenever I go offshore, I'm going to be targeting fish, mainly like red snapper, vermilion snapper, cobia, kingfish. And then when we go really far offshore, we're going to be chasing things like yellowfin tuna, blackfin tuna, the odd swordfish, barracuda, always mixed in there, but general fish of that nature. So I wanted to give you guys a brief idea of the kind of tackle that I use, the leaders that I use, hook sizes, knots, how to catch bait, things of that nature. Really help you guys to understand the best practices whenever you go and you target a lot of these big game fish. So today we're going to start off with a few of the basics. So we're going to start off with leaders today, the connection point from you to the fish. My specialty is sharks in broad strokes. Of course, naturally, only big sharks because I'm the best there is. I've found out the hard way that braided coated cable is the most ideal leader material for these sharks. I did use wire for a long time, and there are a lot of things that wire does that cable simply does not do. This right here is something on the order of 200-pound single strand wire. It is not mono. Sorry for that. So that is single strand, and the reason that you might use single strand wire rather, sorry about that again. The reason you might use single strand steel leaders is because you don't need a tool if you're going to make one up. So all you really have to do is take this wire, put it through your hook and through your swivel, and you can tie it up by hand, no problem. When you're using coated cable, you absolutely cannot tie knots with this unless you are literally Chuck Norris, which I am unfortunately not. You will have to crimp this, and you will have to get good at crimping. There is no sense in using 800 or 900 pound braided cable if your crimps are going to fail at like 50 pounds. That does not make a lot of sense. Kind of going in a similar tone, monofilament is what you're going to use for fish that are significantly less toothy, and you're going to match the size of your mono roughly to the size of the fish that you're trying to catch. There are pros and cons to using really heavy mono as opposed to lighter monofilament. Whenever you fish inshore or near shore, that is within a couple of miles of the beach, down here in South Texas, namely out of like the Surfside, Matagorda, Galveston areas, the water is really not clear enough for most fish to see or be able to detect at all any kind of heavy monofilament. So as long as you're using less than like 500 pound, the fish really isn't going to be able to see it. The issue is when you go with shark fishing, these fish are really toothy, and if you run straight mono, it can be done. I've seen it done, and unfortunately I've done it a few times myself. They will absolutely bite through mono leaders, and it's very easy for that to happen. So you have to use something that's extremely bite resistant, like a steel leader. The reason you would go with this braided cable over something like a single strand wire is because a shark's entire rostral surface, that is the underside of their nose, is covered in these things called ampullae of Lorenzini. Like I said, I'm a marine biologist. Hate to brag, but I'm the best. So with this coated wire, it's a lot harder for them to be able to detect that steel leader, as opposed to something that does not have a plastic coating on it like single strand wire. They're going to be able to detect and say, hey, there's something that's not a fish that's attached to the thing I'm about to eat. And pretty routinely, they will second guess that bite, and then you don't catch fish. And if you don't catch fish, if you're not happy, nobody's happy. And if you take bad advice from someone who's not me, because I will only ever give you good advice, you turn around and you catch big fish because you listen to old Cody here, you're going to have a good time. You're going to like and subscribe because I only give good advice, right? Cool. So, moving on from that, this is going to be your best friend or your worst enemy. This is a spider weight. I have found over the years that there is a correct way to use these and an incorrect way, and there are correct variants of these. Of course, I don't own the incorrect variants because I've been fishing for 10 years and I found out the hard way which ones work and which ones don't work. So this guy right here, memorize the shape of it, that is what you're going to want. There's another flavor of them that I do not have handy, but just keep in mind that there's one other one that in a future video we'll touch base on. I have cats. So we will go over in a future video an in-depth guide on these spider weights and how to correctly bend the legs that they've got to get the best results and get your weight to stick in the sand without it getting pulled by the current. I own everything from 2-ounce spider weights for really light surf, all the way up to 32-ounce, which I haven't used in months because I haven't been fishing like I like to. If I could, I'd fish every day, but such is life. Really, the highest I'll go up to is about a 12-ounce, and more often than not, I'm sticking somewhere in the 6 to 8-ounce range. If you bend these arms correctly, you will get very good success with a very modest sized weight. Like I said, there's a correct way to do it, and I will show you guys how to not only bend the arms correctly, but how to make sure before you deploy your bait out, 2, 3, 4, 500 yards into the surf, you can know with absolute confidence that your spider weight is going to stick in the sand because you can visually confirm it on the beach before it goes out there. And you'll know it's going to work because you listen to me. So that's going to be a future video. I will show you guys again in a future video because this is just the pilot episode and we're not doing any fishing today. I'm going to try to keep this brief because we only ever watch YouTube videos to see people fish, and I'm not fishing today, unfortunately. So I will show you guys how to tie up or crimp these cable leaders, as well as how to tie wire leaders, which is a very handy trick to learn. It's called a haywire twist. If you want to Google it yourself, there's a right and a wrong way to do that. I will show you both so that you can compare notes on what looks right and what does not look right, and I'll give you some variants on what it might look like the first couple of times that you tie it versus when you're an absolute pro like me, how it should turn out in ideal circumstances, as well as a lot of the knots that I like to use on both heavy and light monofilament. This is 150 pound, which is my general go-to for most things in the surf. But we'll go into that in a later video, as well as top shots, connecting your braided line to your monofilament, whether you want to use a swivel and just tie from the braid to the swivel, swivel to the mono, and then the mono on down to the rest of your leader. That is completely up to you. I prefer splices, but that is an argument for a future video. As far as rods and reels go, you have a lot of options. So here I have a pretty widespread, as well as this one that I boofed up and put on the wrong table. This general size for surf fishing, if you're going to be dropping baits, is pretty ideal. This is a size 60 pin squall lever drag. I really prefer lever drags over star drags, which we will get into. I will have to steal one of my buddy's reels because I don't own any star drags. But this size is really good. You can upsize it if you want to, you can downsize, but from a size 60, which is not a 60 wide, or a size 30, which is not a 30 wide, you can kind of finagle it. A lot of the brands are going to be vaguely different in their exact sizes. So you'll see things like the Avets use the SX, MX, LX, and all on up and down the way as how they gauge the size of their reels. I just sold my last Avet for this monster right here, so I don't own any Avets to show you today. But this is one of my go-tos. Like I said, it's Pin Fathom 60. It's a really handy reel. It's got a smoking high gear ratio. It pulls in 60 inches per turn with a high gear only, which is kind of a pain. Off the beach, I usually prefer a 2-speed, really off the beach and on the boat as well. This is a Pin Fathom 30, and it is a 2-speed model, so you can shift from a high gear ratio to a low gear ratio, which is really, really handy. If you're harnessed up and you're fighting, let's say like a big shark or a big yellowfin or something, and you're sitting there and you're fighting, you're in high gear, and it starts making its circles. It's nice to be able to drop it into a lower gear ratio and just winch it up. It's really handy. But then sometimes these big fish, being that they're very large, they can also be very fast. And it's nice to be able to bump it into a high gear ratio, and if they charge right at you, or if you're making really good headway, it's nice to be able to retrieve line a lot faster and catch up to that fish a lot more efficiently. You never want to get slack in your line. You want to make sure your connection from the reel on down to the fish is as tight as possible. If that line gets loose, you run a really dangerous risk of it shaking the hook and the leader loose, and that means you don't catch a fish, and that sucks. So keep your line tight. Now, beyond conventionals, I use a lot of spinning rods and reels. This is my go-to. It is a pin slammer. This is my first big game shark reel that I ever bought. I've had this monster for going on 7 years now, I believe, and it is an absolute workhorse. I'm horrible about servicing my rods and reels, and this thing has functionally bottomless line capacity. It holds 500 and some change yards. I think it's like 535 yards of 80-pound braid with 60 pounds of drag, which is a lot. I have personally had this thing locked down on the boat fighting something and had drag pulled off of this reel at 60 pounds. On spinning tackle, it's just not that fun, but it's nice to have the option. If you want to back the drag down a little bit, fight it at a more moderate pace, it's all up to you. But these reels are mad smooth. I have cleaned this thing myself maybe 5 times in the several years that I've owned it, and it still works. That's all I really care about. This guy's made it up to a 2-piece pin carnage rod. I get a lot of flack for making sure that all of my rods and reels are the same color. When you get to the point where you know what you're doing well enough to match this stuff up, to have black and gold reel on black and gold rod, you know that you've really gone too far and you need to dial back the bougie just a little bit. But I do really appreciate the actions of the Carnage 2s. I know the Carnage 3s are out right now. I have owned one and I did some very stupid things with it, and I broke mine. No fault of the rod, but it's broke now, and I'm not going to buy another one because I'll buy another one when I break one of these. I can't break one of these, so there's that. I also have what I call overkill rods and reels. So this is a Shimano Tiagra 130. This is absolute overkill for anything that you're going to need off the beach by a wide margin. It is pretty useful whenever you get offshore and you're going to do something like deep drops for swordfish, pulling bait all the way up from the bottom. Well, not the bottom, but extraordinarily deep. It can be a real nightmare, so having something that's big enough to get the line capacity, get the bait sunk, and gets you a lot of range is really nice. We do see a lot of proper billfish out there, marlin and whatnot. I have owned an 80 wide in the past, and I tried to hook a marlin with it, and it did not pan out in my favor, so now I own a 130, and there is nothing a fish can do to get away from me when I've got a hook in them with this thing. So overkill is the name of the game whenever you're surf fishing. It's very important, conservation-wise, to make sure that you have the correct tackle. A lot of the fish that you're going to see whenever you hit the beach, well, maybe not necessarily a lot, but enough for it to be a concern, are going to be species of fish that are either endangered or protected as bycatch. Therefore, you can't keep them. And that's going to be species like a lot of the really cool hammerheads that we've got down here. You can't keep, and even if you could, you shouldn't, because shark's not very good to eat. Mounts can be made online pretty easily. But it's really important not to kill these fish if you're not going to keep them. And this is true also for the unprotected species, or the ones that are regulated, but not endangered. They're least concerned species like that. It's very important to make sure that you're not going to waste a fish, just kill it, and then not do anything with that fish. If you do take a fish out of the water, handle it very gently. These fish do not breathe air like we do. And so overhandling them and then trying to release them is going to result in a fish that is floating belly up offshore, or that it washes up on the beach whenever you go hit the surf, and that's not good for anyone, and it looks really good for fishermen all over the world, so we're going to try to avoid that, and I'm going to give you, again, some best practices to avoid these things. Now, in that same token, I'm going to talk about some of the ways that I deploy baits. I do the 3 main types of beach fishing, which again is my specialty. So I cast out my baits pretty routinely. And then I also own a kayak, which is pretty ideal for bombing really, really large baits as far as you can go out into the surf. You don't have to worry about battery connectivity and satellites if you're the one in the boat taking it out. So if you're going to be taking out really large baits for really large fish really far out, if you're using something that is something like, let's say, a 30 wide or a 50 wide or an 80 wide or a monster of a 130 like this, a kayak is probably a really good idea. They're much cheaper than drones. I recently bought a Swell Pro Fisherman Max FD2. That was the most amount of money that I've been allowed to spend on any fishing tackle in recent memory. So kayaking is ideal for larger baits going further out, but you cannot beat the ease of use of a drone. I get a lot of flack for that as well, because drones are looked upon as kind of the easy way out, but it's easier, it's safer. We're going to do devoted videos on how to properly cast out your baits, how to get them from the beach out into the water where you're going to want to aim for. You know, distance doesn't mean anything if you make a really nice deep cast and your bait lands on top of the sandbar. That's not good. You're not going to catch as many fish like that. You're going to aim for the guts rather than the cuts. And you're going to try to get it in as deep a water as possible. And sometimes that is going to mean casting it a little bit shallower, but inside the room between 2 sandbars. And like I said, we'll go into a devoted video over that. And then also for kayaking and drone fishing. Kayaking can be extraordinarily dangerous, and I have definitely eaten it multiple times on the surf. And it gets kind of sketchy sometimes, so definitely going with a partner or several. Having people keeping an eye on your tackle when you go with a deep bait out way into the surf. Wear a life jacket. Have people that are aware of what happens if you get 1,000 yards off the beach and then you eat it in the surf and you can't get your kayak righted and you're in trouble. Call the Coast Guard. You would think that would be obvious, but I digress. And then some of the ways that you can implement drones for some of your medium to short range, quick hammer 'em out drops. You know, we're talking about something where you're dropping, you know, maybe a live croaker or a mullet, usually a bait about like so, somewhere inside of, you know, 500 yards. The drones are good for taking really moderately large baits out fairly deep. The FD2 has a maximum distance of just shy of a mile, and it's got a lift capacity of 7.7 pounds, which is a really big bait, and that's really far. So you can do it, but it's going to eat up your battery. And again, we'll have devoted videos on that. But those are just some of the basics of what this channel is going to cover. You know, how-tos, actual fishing videos where I go out and I show you, hey, this is the tackle that I use. This is the leader that you saw me tie up. This is the bait that I showed you how to catch. And we're going to take the things that you understand now, and we're going to go out and we're going to tackle these big game fish. And we're going to start catching monsters, and it's going to be awesome, and everyone's going to be happy, and life is going to be good. So until those videos start coming out, be sure to drop a like and subscribe. Like I said, this is my first video on this channel, so you are probably not liking or subscribing anything because there's nothing to like or subscribe to. So once I start making decent content, be sure to drop a like, subscribe, comment. If there's anything that you don't understand, be sure to let me know. I'll be happy to clarify in the comments or make a devoted video on it. I am not hurting for I'm not hurting for content this time of the year, so there are going to be a lot of videos that I'm probably going to hammer out really quickly and give you guys some good tips, tricks, best practices, and hopefully get you guys on some really nice fish. So until then, guys, tight lines and fair winds. Thank you.